Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. I am James Azar. Make sure you're following me on Twitter, James_Azar1. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. We've got a great episode today. I've got Donna Gallaher. Sorry.
Thank you.
Donna Gallaher, and she is the president of the Atlanta chapter for the FAIR Institute. She's also on their board of advisors, and she's also a virtual CISO. And we did a panel a few weeks together. I had a great time. I've known Donna for quite some time, and I'm really excited that she's finally on the podcast. This will be an amazing episode. But before we get started, I want to do a quick message from our sponsors. I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Get Smart Eye. That's Get Smart Eye, like your eye, EYE.com. It's a new security company that's focused on your privacy. How many of you guys have eyes around watching your screens, your phones, your tablets, no matter where you are? It can be your own office, an airport, a train station, a co-working space, and even a coffee shop, right? But there's some documents and some information that really needs to stay away from prying eyes. That's where Get Smart Eye comes in. They're using the latest biometric technology to give you complete control over the documents you send and who sees them. Whether you're viewing them yourself or sending them for someone else to view them, the Get Smart Eye technology ensures that whoever's seeing it is the right person. And should someone who shouldn't see it grab a look at it, it gets the document to disappear and won't reopen it until it verifies the identity of the person you sent it to. So to get more information, go to getsmarteye.com/James. Again, that's getsmarteye.com/James. Again, getsmarteye.com/James. All right. Now we're going to do our ceremonial espresso shot on the show. We've obviously got our Nicaragua Nespresso capsules. This is Nicaraguan coffee. It is delicious, I think. I enjoy it a lot. Cheers.
Cheers.
It's like a shot of vodka. You know how good it is though? The foam on the bottom. If you can't see the foam on the bottom, that's how you know you get a good espresso. Like Starbucks never has foam on the bottom of their espressos. Never, ever. If you just get a single shot, it's just not there. So that's that. Nespresso Nicaragua, kind of our tradition. And my cheap attempt to get Nespresso to sponsor the show so that I don't have to spend $250 a month on coffee. That's how cheap I am for Nespresso.
I found some cheap knockoffs from Nespresso. It's like half the price. I'll have to send you.
Please.
Send you where it is.
Target has them for like 40 cents a capsule.
Instead of $1 a capsule, yeah.
Yeah, and well, Nespressos are like 72 cents a capsule.
Depends which ones you get.
Depends which. The new Cuban kind. I've got a sleeve of that. Those are $2 a capsule.
Yeah.
I watch those I'm like Cubans is only for special. It's not Cuban. It's Costa Rica.
Okay.
Costa Rica is $2 a capsule. It's $20 a sleeve. That's crazy.
I'll bring you some of the knockoff, and you can tell me what you think.
Yes,
okay.
I love it. I'm all about it. Donna, thanks for being here today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, James.
I'm so excited that we've finally been able to get you on the podcast and kind of be able to talk a little bit about everything you do, and and you're very, very knowledgeable. You have, I think you've got a very, very good track record behind you. But I won't keep building you up. I'll let you kind of tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about your background and what you've done.
Okay. Well, I started my career in electrical engineering, and after a few years, I decided I really didn't want to just be an engineer. I wanted to do something more people-focused. So I got into sales. And then I got into more technology sales and enjoyed that, had some successes as a director of sales. And then I got into IT service management with Wipro and with SunGard. So it was more of a customer advocacy type of role. And I really liked that because it had a combination of sales and technology and, maintaining a relationship with the customer throughout their life cycle. And from there, I kind of transitioned from IT operations into security, and I've held several positions, high-level IT and security positions with ABB Software, First Advantage, and Income Financial Services. And just last year, I started my own business as a virtual or fractional CISO, and I've also gotten certified in data privacy for GDPR, so I do both security and data privacy work.
It's funny because our first conversation that you and I think met for the first time was around data privacy, was around kind of GDPR. And I've always been, I don't want to say I've been a skeptic of GDPR, but I think the numbers speak for themselves. I personally don't feel like GDPR has added a lot when it comes to privacy. I did the numbers. So
Okay.
I know this is kind of like off our kind of plan today. We want to talk about
I'm
the FAIR
flexible
Institute,
though, so.
But and the reason I say that is because when I did the numbers, so when you think of the amount of complaints that were filed by EU citizens in the first year of GDPR, it was only 144,000 complaints that were filed with the various regulators across all 28 EU nations out of 512 million people that live in the EU. So that's 0.0002% of the population.
Well, they've had years of, 30, 40 years of culture of having their privacy respected in a way that is foreign to the U.S. So I would think that, they're not seeing the same experience that we have in the U.S. So maybe, because their culture is that way, maybe you wouldn't see as many violations as you would here.
That's a really interesting point. I never looked at it that way. Even though I've been to Europe a ton, I never thought of the Europeans as being very private people. The reason I say that is because once you meet them, like within an hour of drinking beer with a German dude, you'll know his entire life story.
I would think that's volunteered though.
Right.
It's not taken from them. If it's something that they voluntarily give, and they want to share their life story with you, and it's not like there's an electronic record of that you're going to actually sell. They're trying to build a relationship with you, but not that you're looking to take their information and market it out to everybody and their friend like you are here in the U.S.
Well, I think in the U.S. when we allowed telemarketing to just run loosely, we gave up our privacy. When we were taking a 7 p.m. telemarketing call during dinner, I think Americans, I don't want to say gave up their privacy, but we've allowed capitalism to invade our home life.
Well, it's never been a part of our culture like it's been in the EU. So, we had the Nazis. You were on the wrong list or part of the wrong group or whatever, and somebody took you away and you were never to be seen again. So that's how that culture evolved. Here in the U.S., and then they also had separate member states that didn't necessarily have a homogeneous, legal system to challenge each other on this stuff. Here in the U.S., we've only had one country with different states, and basically homogenous in our legal structure. We've always had a Supreme Court. If there was a difference between the states, we've had some privacy, for healthcare and for children and some financial, services. That type of data has been protected, but largely, we've pretty much been unregulated when it came to privacy and never given a choice. But everyone that I've spoken to, when you present them with the OECD guidelines, like, yeah, this sounds like a privacy bill of rights. I should really, I want these rights too, and I'd like to be able to object. But it's if you're given a take it or leave it type of service, and you really want that service for some reason, they feel like they've got no choice, and they end up opting in for that service. But I think if people had more of a choice and were more educated, and some of the companies are required to now comply with GDPR, and rather than having two sets of rules for EU data subjects and US data subjects, maybe they'll want to just have one, and give everybody recognize those rights. And then the whole Cambridge Analytica stuff, when that thing hit the fan, people really started realizing how much can be garnered from what seems to be innocuous information and public record searches.
Do you feel like Cambridge Analytica was a breach of trust or a misuse of data?
I'd say both. I think the first case of privacy that kind of caught my attention was back when they had the Target
breach.
It wasn't a Target breach. This was the teenage girl, it was like 2013, who started getting pregnancy or coupons, for, in the mail, and her father got very upset and wrote back to Target, said, "Why are you sending my daughter this information?" It was because of her buying purchases and her surveillance of what she was looking at or whatever in the store. They were able to predict that this girl was pregnant based on her other purchases, and she fessed up to her father later on, but Target knew before her
dad.
father knew. So it shows you the power of profiling information, and people don't realize, oh yeah, I'll give you, my location, or I'll give you my payment history, I'll give you, what apps I have on my phone, and they're building a dossier on you that they can pretty much nudge you in any direction that you want to go, that they want to go in. And then you get into ethical issues of, well, is it really my data, and are target ads going to be sent to me based on my preferences, or is it really whoever's paying for that if they want to push me in a certain direction, it's really those people that are owning my data. So this stuff hasn't been figured out yet in the US of, are you really going to get objective information?
So my other podcast that we do called Goodbye Privacy, I just literally did, it's funny you bring that up. We use the hashtag, the hat right next to you there says data cartels, and that's kind of our hashtag. And the reason, and the last episode I just did that we put out last week was on data brokers. Mm-hmm. And they spend zero money getting your data. It's a $200 billion a year industry. Mm-hmm. Vermont is the only state to have any sort of registry or regulation around data brokers. Mm-hmm. State of Vermont.
Okay.
No other states in the union.
If there's enough heat, I think that we might start seeing others.
So we literally just did a bunch of infographics on the industry and the kind of data they collect. But the largest company in the industry, I think they're called Axiom, ACXIOM. They're the largest data broker in the industry. They have 23,000 servers processing and building dossiers on consumers, and they can predict based on your habits when you're going to get married, when you're going to buy a car, when you want to when you want to buy a new toothbrush, when you want to get toilet paper. I mean, they go to a scary level.
Absolutely.
And they sell that data to, Walmart, Target, Amazon, you name it. People buy that data because it helps them target you better.
Did you see the HBO special on Brexit?
No.
So Brexit, they're saying that's actually how they got Brexit passed, was Cambridge Analytica was one of the service, that was researching who were the disenfranchised voters that nobody's talked to for years and years, who have been impacted by the things that Brexit was trying to, and then they had a ground campaign to go find those people, get them re-engaged into the voting process. And so they were not on anyone's poll list. They hadn't voted in 20 years or 10 years or whatever it was. And because they were targeted, they got out their side of the vote, and that's how Brexit got put through. So you're influencing elections now, which is terrifying.
So part of one thing we're doing with Goodbye Privacy is we're trying to see how people manipulate data to really influence elections.
Oh yeah.
And we know that the Russian interference in the 2016 campaign was a misinformation campaign, using social media platforms to put out a bunch of misinformation, whether it be fake news articles, whether it be rumors, conspiracy theories, you name it. And we are at a crossroads. We are at a big fork in the road as a nation, because we have to make a decision. Do we want to go and regulate social media, and then how does that infringe on our First Amendment right? Like, if you say I can't post anything political on social media unless I verify my identity, then does that infringe on our First Amendment right for freedom of speech?
Well, I've heard a different argument about social media. Is it a platform
or a utility?
Or a utility, exactly. So if it's open, so and the company has to decide, which it is. If it's going to be, here's the platform of open thoughts and there's no censorship. They can't regulate it that way. But if it is a utility and you have to I'm sorry, I got them reversed. If you, it's one or the other. Either you've got a free reign to do whatever and say whatever you want on that, as long as you're not hurting anybody, or not.
Or you're a utility, which at that point you'll be regulated by the government,
Right.
which I'm not a fan of, because I feel like no matter if you give that power to a government, it'll become like redistricting. Right? Every 2, 3, 4 years, whoever's in charge, whoever has majority, is going to try to change something in the regulation to make it more favorable to them.
Well, the other challenge you have with privacy and government is the Fourth Amendment. So people say, well, it only applies to the government itself. But if you have the government routinely going to Facebook or going to Twitter or going to wherever to get their surveillance of consumers, they become agents of the government. So, the Fourth Amendment does need to extend to those. So you do need to have a right to be secure in your persons and papers and information. And I haven't seen a lot of writings on that. I haven't seen a lot of conservative writings on the extent of the Fourth Amendment applying into private sector as an agent of the government.
I feel like in our nation, as you said, in Europe, they care more about their privacy and lists and different aspects of it. I find that in our country, people are so oblivious to it. They're more, I don't want to say they're not interested in it. I just think they're more people are so focused on themselves, on who they want to be or who they are in their own lives, that they're not looking outside of it. And then the people who really do care, unfortunately, are either way too radical on either side of the aisle, and you have no moderate consensus that comes in advocates for it. And the moderate consensus isn't loud enough like the extreme. And we live in I don't want to say we live in a bad time. I think we live in the greatest time ever on planet Earth. We're, I think a decade away from being able to travel to space. I saw this documentary on it yesterday, and I can't believe how close we are to being able to be in space. They say that by 2030, it'll cost you $5,000 to take a trip around Earth in space.
Interesting.
So, I mean, if you think of that, that's a business class ticket to Europe. So that would make it extremely affordable for a good part of the population to be able to go to space. We live in a post-industrial world where everything's at our fingertips. We don't have a food shortage. We don't have to worry about famine in our nation, although parts of the world still have that. But in our nation, in this country, there's really no reason that someone should be on the streets starving, because we just have so much food and we have so much opportunity, and like that to me is just, we live in the greatest time ever. And we're now dealing with challenges that come with that greatest time ever, and a lot of it is around privacy, and a lot of it is also around risk. We live in a time where now assessing and looking at risk from a business or a personal life perspective is different from before. 30 years ago, when someone wanted to travel, I was in Europe. I'll tell you this really funny story. Okay. I was in the Balkan region. I was in Kosovo, and I was traveling with one of my Kosovarian colleagues. We were flying somewhere for a business trip for 2 days, and his entire family came to the airport. Now, when you and I travel, no one picks us up, no one drops us off, no one waves us off, no one's crying. But in that part of the world, that part of Eastern Europe and the Balkans, going to the airport is an entire family sending that person off, with the mothers and wives and kids crying like the person is leaving. And then the welcome back is the whole family at the airport waiting in the arrival hall for the person to arrive. So whenever I would land anywhere in Romania, Bulgaria, Kosovo, Albania, Serbia, that whole part of the world, I would have a driver wait for me, but everyone else had 5-6 people waiting for him just to arrive, right? And that part of just that culture, that they look at that travel, airplane travel, as a risk. Someone going abroad for them is risky. Like, why would you leave your little village where you're safe, where life is simple, to go to Frankfurt, Germany? Why would you want? Frankfurt is dangerous. There are robberies and murders and all these different things. And that's the risk. Like, that's the risk perspective on it. And I was just, like, when you look at it like that, you went, wow. Like, it's 2000, at the time it was 2013, 14, 15. And I was all like, are you kidding me? I've traveled 280 days a year. I mean, I've never had any sort of anyone take me to the airport.
Hey, they're happy with that, though. That's what their values are. They have completely different values. I mean, in a way, you're kind of envious of that. I wish we had that. You are. I wish someone was happy to see me when I got there.
Outside of my dog. Only my dog wiggles. Only my dog wiggles his tail. Is like, I'm back. You're back. Let's go for a walk. And you're like, I'm tired. But it's true. That's their value. That's just the way they do things. And that kind of gets us into risk. And really, I wanted to talk to you about the FAIR Institute.
Yes.
Because it's new to Atlanta. It's not new. But for those who are hearing about the FAIR Institute for the first time, tell us a little bit what it's all about.
So FAIR stands for Factor Analysis of Information Risk, is what the acronym stands for. And it's a quantitative risk analysis methodology that you can apply with whatever other framework you're using. So basically, it answers the question, so what? You know, if you present a risk to a CEO, he really wants to know what the financial implications of that risk is, not just, why do I even care about this? So it goes into, how much reputation damage is there going to be? What productivity loss could there be? Is there replacement costs? Are there fines and judgments associated with a particular risk? And you want numbers around those things. And then based on what controls you have in place, how likely is that loss event to happen? So you really have to identify both the asset, the thing that has value, and then the threat is the person or the group of people that would be after that asset. So once you look into a scenario, that's the kind of thing that a CEO is more interested in hearing about, of what is the loss event for a particular scenario and how likely are we to suffer that loss.
How did you get involved with FAIR? Because they're fairly new. How long have they been around for?
Well, the book came out in 2015, but the practitioners and the people that had started FAIR have been doing it for some time before that, just kind of in their own practice. So, I only learned about it in about 2015. And I was struggling with, as a CISO, I was struggling with this so what question. I'd present dashboards of red, yellow, green, here's our program maturity, and it had no meaning to the executive team or the board of directors. They'd say, well, is this good? Is this bad? I can't really tell, what does this mean for us? And it was way too in the weeds, too many controls, no context around, what this actually meant to the company.
Right.
So I needed to solve that question for me to be more effective in my job. So someone told me about FAIR, and then more recently I, read the book, and I'm like, this is the missing link. This is the answer. That when I can break risks down into their component parts, that's the factoring part of it, is understanding what are the components that make up what the frequency and the magnitude of a particular loss is, and present that back. It has meaning to the rest of the business. That's the business conversation that most cyber folks miss when they're talking to the C-suite or the board. Correct. How practical, though, is the FAIR framework as compared to like other frameworks? Well, it's not so much a framework; it's a methodology. Okay. Whereas if you were to start an audit, of a company, you'd probably start looking at what controls they have in place. You start with their policy,
Right.
maybe the effectiveness of those controls or their policy, but you're really not asking, what data do you have here? You kind of learn that from the privacy side. That's what the privacy team comes in and asks. What private data do you have? If you expand that scope to say, well, what regulated data do you have? What confidential data? What do you have that's valuable? Is it our blueprints? Is it our secret formula? Is it our marketing plan? Is it our financial reports? Or what do we have in this department that's valuable? And what controls do we have in place to protect that data? So it immediately appeals to every department in the company. You're the finance director, and I say, what do you most care about? What's your biggest fear? And says, well, it's our financial status getting out, or our M&A strategy getting out, or something like that. And you start having discussions about security controls around that data that he cares about most. He's immediately engaged in the process, wants to know more, wants to help solve the problem and take ownership of it, because that's what he cares about. Then you walk over to the to the product development team, and they say, well, we care about what our customers are saying back about our product, so we can do the next improvement to whatever the product is. Maybe that's what they care about most. Is all right, well, where is that stored, and how is that protected, and who has access to it? And the light bulb goes on. Okay, now I see security as a service provider to me, and that's what you want. You don't want security to be just its own entity that sit over here in the corner. You want security integrated into the business. So when you can have those relevant discussions with each of those business units about the data they care about the most, it changes the culture of the whole company. And that's exactly what you want as a CISO.
CISOs, obviously, in the roles, I always say a CISO wears so many hats in a company, right? And a lot of it is, you not only need to secure the company, you need to sell security in the company and outside the company. If you're part of a supply chain, you're one of those guys that's going to be involved in the sales calls. Spoke to a CISO that does that just yesterday, and and I was like, so how does your time divide? And he goes, I've got 3-4 security engineers that really do the day-to-day, because I'm on 4 or 5 sales calls a day with our sales team, talking about our security, because our clients care about it. Typically, if they're walking through our facility, if they're just coming by, that's a very big deal. It's huge. CISOs have so much to deal with, and they're often, as I like to say, they get the shaft if something happens. Mm-hmm. They rarely get support when something happens. Mm-hmm. They're typically isolated in the corner, having to fight the battle and their own tails. But then on the back end of it, everyone wants them to do everything perfect 100% of the time. And
even then, you're still probably going to suffer an incident at some point.
How can a CISO really leverage the FAIR methodology to in his everyday work? I told you earlier, it kind of makes his life a little bit easier when it comes to reporting to the board and the C-suite. But how does it, because you were a CISO before and you've done this work, if you had FAIR in your various roles, how would it helped you do your job better or be more successful?
CISOs are already doing a risk assessment. When you first walk into a company, that's the first thing you do. You talk to everybody in the company and you ask them, what do you do in your department? What type of data do you have in your department? And like I said, you're going to now start asking, well, let's put some numbers around it. How many records in that database? What is the average cost of the record? How much are you actually paying? What's the average labor rate, for the people in this department? And if you were to have a breach, how many people would you have to have in that meeting to figure it out? And how long would it go on? So you're coming up with costs that appeal to that business rather than just talking about the checklist of controls. And like I said, that's immediately applicable to large companies, to small companies. You really want to have, scenario-based discussions, is how I guess you would apply that.
Let's kind of transition I like to call it the small business kind of medium companies, some of them who don't have a virtual CISO, who may only have a CIO or a CTO who serves as kind of, or even a director of IT that wears all these different hats. How can they leverage FAIR? And does FAIR really apply to them, or is FAIR mostly an enterprise methodology?
It applies to everyone. Now, there are free tools that small businesses can use, but it's a little bit harder, for small businesses to use it because there's just not as much data. So if I had, 100,000 alerts come in a month, I'd have more data to pull from in order to be able to say, how likely is this threat to actually turn into a loss for us. But in terms of your thinking, a small business can say, I only have so many dollars and I can put it towards this problem, or this problem. How do you pick, right? So if you're allocating your resources based on what your financial losses is, that's probably the best use of time. So let's say CyberHub Engage. You've got a website, you've got social media accounts. I don't know if you're taking credit card payments for anything. I don't know what it is. Well, that'd be nice.
We definitely want to. We'd like people to pay us.
But basically, let's say your business model is, let's say, the sponsorships,
right?
And what surrounding that transaction. So maybe if you had a vulnerability on your website, it wouldn't be awful because there's really not a financial loss. There may be some reputation loss, maybe you lose some subscribers because they were redirected somewhere they didn't mean to go, or but really the keys to your kingdom are really going to be your sponsorship dollars and maybe some reputation around the security there.
Right.
So if I had to only fix one problem, I'd want to make sure that is what's secured. So do I have multi-factor set up with my banks? Do I have an authentication procedure? So if there's a change, to send it to this bank account versus this bank account, that both me and my supplier know how to handle these changes and what the approval process is. Those are the kind of things that I'd want to focus my efforts in, rather than just, this vulnerability scan on my website showed I've got some vulnerabilities that I need to go pay somebody to go fix now. So that's the kind of thing of understanding what data you have that's valuable to the business, what generates revenue for the business, and focusing your efforts and your resources on fixing those things first, and then maturing your program and getting to the other things later.
Do you really need to be an IT or cyber person to be able to understand FAIR, or can anyone with any kind of business acumen use it?
Anyone really can use it. It's not a very technical thing. You would need probably a technology person to kind of explain some of the controls in place and what those mean. But in terms of understanding what the loss is and what the components of the loss is, just a general business knowledge is really all that's needed.
So that's really interesting, because when you think of quantitative risk, in a lot of organizations today, they're kind of starting to build their kind of data risk people. So, you and I both know Ken Viciana. He was on the podcast in an earlier episode, and one of the things he does is pretty much stuff similar to what the FAIR methodology is for first data. He's looking at, what's the value of every piece of data? What's the risks there? All that good stuff.
I gotta sneeze. Sorry.
Bless you. It's fine. Micah adjusted the audio. But Ken really kind of plays into, this whole trying to understand, with the boards wanting to understand what's the value of a record, of data, of so many others. So really FAIR kind of plays into that space right there. Is that right? Is my understanding
Absolutely,
of FAIR right?
Yeah. And it's going to take some art and science to figure out where to get the numbers from. That really is the hard part. Conceptually, it's pretty easy, and it's a light bulb that goes on. And once you've been introduced, you're kind of red-pilled, and you say, I get it now. I can't see the world differently now. Now I see it in terms of financial losses to the company, and likelihoods and probabilities. And the other thing is it's not anything possible, because typically anything is possible, but is it's likely or not? Is it probable that it's going to happen within a fairly short time period is the other thing. So A lot of times you say, well, it is conceivable that somebody could get in through this, back door, but is that really likely for that? Is it really likely that the cleaning crew is like Mission Impossible? They've got some undercover operation to go get, the...
Well, it depends who you are, right?
Maybe. It might be. It might not be. Like I said, like the OPM breach, people, you might have spies actually going to the OPM to try to get that to blackmail government workers all over the world.
Or discover if someone is really somewhere.
But if you're a heating and air conditioning company, and
Target.
Like I said, maybe not. Maybe they just want the list of data. But is it really likely that it's going to come from the cleaning crew who's going to crack into the system? Or is it really likely, based on your business model, that that's happening? Some businesses, yes. Some no.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because when you look at, kind of analyzing risk and how some companies do this and how others do it and how different CISOs look at risk and how risk really plays into the whole approach to security, a lot of times it's the company that you expect the least from that has an issue. I mean, think of the AMCA breach right now that LabCorp and Quest Diagnostics are going through. That's a collection agency.
Well, again, I did hear a statistic that 50% of breaches were coming from small and medium businesses. All right, so that is a big number, but what is the asset that's being targeted is kind of what my point is. If it's really not that small business data, they're looking for the big fish on the other side. So it's not necessarily the employee records of the heating and air conditioning company. It's really who they're servicing. So let's say it is Home Depot or somewhere else like that. Those are the records they're really after. Those are the ones that have the financial data. What good, let's say, would employee home addresses do me if it's public record anyway? It doesn't really matter, all right? Not that it doesn't matter, but it's not as attractive. That's really not what the threat actor is after. It really is financial information from the big fish. So
we look at that as being a strategic kind of approach to it, right? I mean, in the JP Morgan breach in 2014, those guys took names, phone numbers, and email addresses, data that you and I would be like, that's really public record. Like there was nothing unique about the data, but they made $2 billion off that data.
Like I said, there might be a bigger target. We're talking about small and medium businesses,
right.
And if I can get employee records for 30 people, I mean, is that really worth my effort, or am I going to go trying to get after JP Morgan Chase's, millions of
records, yeah.
If I only can do this once, I'm going to go for the big records rather than the 30 employee, shop.
As a virtual fractional CISO, right, kind of in your life outside of FAIR,
okay.
I like to say, we're just talking about the different challenges, and you said 50% of breaches come from, the smaller, medium-sized companies. What's the challenge you see with kind of letting these small, medium-sized businesses understand you're the low-hanging fruit for hackers? You really have to start budgeting for this, putting it in your plan, and understanding that you're going to have to do something about it.
Yeah, it's a really underserved market, and they don't really help themselves because there's not. I see a lot of small businesses are still in denial about how big a risk they actually are to their customers. Let's say their enterprise customers. So maybe they haven't done their research for their compliance requirements. They say, oh, I've got a good idea, and they just put together a website and they start selling a service, really not understanding, what all the requirements are. They have to have a policy in place. It's got to be a comprehensive policy, because no one really just wants a little, they want to know what their third-party vendor screening process is. So there's a lot around security, even if you're a small business, and some get it and some don't. Some just say, this is too big for me, and I don't know that they're actually going to make it. The ones that I think have an expectation of, I need to meet the big company security requirements and build their company, that way are going to be more successful. The second challenge I think they have is there's not a lot of tools for really small businesses. So I was on a webinar yesterday, and it was supposed to be security for small and medium businesses, and really what they were doing was kind of outsourced, SOC, threat hunting, whatever. So if you had less than 6 to 8 people to run your own 24/7 SOC, maybe you want to work with one of these guys. Or like you were saying, if you only have a IT manager or a CTO, you don't really have a full team, then yes, you probably would use some. But what if you're a one-man guy? What if you're a realtor or a CPA or an attorney or someone it's just you? There's not a lot of help for those people, and those are the people that feel like I really would like to help and are underserved.
I feel like in the cyber market, people are pricing for enterprise and then complaining about the long sales cycle and completely ignoring the small and medium-sized sector because they can't afford a multi-million-dollar, Splunk system or setting up a hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment or security. That's just, you put them out of business.
So I was reviewing some vendor agreements or some customer agreements yesterday for one of my customers, and one of the things that the enterprise company had asked of this smaller company who did consulting services was they wanted an independent attestation for all of their third parties. Like, well, all right, you can ask if they have a SOC 2 report, if they've got a PCI report on compliance, if they've got an ISO certification, yeah, we can accept those. And I can do an audit of all of their third parties as me being the independent attestation if I looked at their security program. But then I got to go find somebody to verify my security program for that person's credit. So it's like, well, where do you draw the line? I've got to go get a certification or get a friend to say, here's my policy, here's all my practices, here's the tools that I'm using, and get him to sign off on my security program just so that I comply with that term of that customer's agreement. So, like I said, there's not a lot of help for very, very small businesses, and there's not a lot of tools also to help them. So I'd also said, well, let's see, what can we do for like a phishing campaign? So if let's say you're first starting your business out, maybe you don't have, access to phishing tools or phishing tests or something to subscribe against you. Trying to find tools like that. Just yesterday, I actually found a free scan for a website. So it'll do a vulnerability scan against your website. So I ran it against mine. And, I have my website hosted on Wix, or some have it on WordPress. You'd have to pay somebody to go out there and do that. And an enterprise vendor who does that, as a service really doesn't care about your one little puny domain with nothing else under it. There's no money in that for them. So maybe they'll give you a free assessment that you can run yourself, but then to understand what those things are, you need someone like me to kind of tell you, oh, this is what this means. You click here and they can download your database if they put a script in, a SQL injection or something like that. So we're talking about what the mistakes are that small businesses make. The third one is they think of security as a project. So I see a lot of jobs that just say we want a compliance assessment and then the job is done, where security really needs to be a continuous thing. That is kind of how I structured my business. Is I'd like to get retained services. Maybe it's just a couple hours a month, but at least you're making forward progress as you're able to mature your program over time, and you work on the hottest problems first.
Do you feel like because of a small business mentality, and we know that there's a huge difference between enterprise level and kind of corporate, what some people will label as corporate America, and then the small business mentality, right? So corporate America is very structured, very permission based, and small business really isn't. Most small businesses don't even have permissions for employees. Most employees have access to everything. Most employees don't go through a background check because you're hiring people. You don't have time to really go through all those different steps. I mean, when you talk about security being a continuous model, is this one of the kind of changes we need to start seeing from small businesses, that behavior of
Well,
within
again,
a small
it goes
business?
back to what kind of small business is and what the data is that they're going to have access to. So if I want to open a cupcake shop, really, I need a baker. You know, the
Right.
baker's not necessarily going to be interfacing with your customer database. You know, they just need to know what to bake. So it's a role-based access control problem. Now, if I have a marketing team that is going to be collecting and sending coupons out for cupcakes, you know, specials for the month or something or other, and I have to make sure I'm getting consent from those customers to receive those type of things, they are going to have a different level of access than the baker. So you really have to understand this. You know, like I said, the compliance requirements for your business are not normally understood by non-technical people, and that's I think one of the biggest mistakes. When you start your business, start by understanding what your compliance requirements are going to be.
So we always talk about compliance, and I feel like security is always, you know, when you say security, the next thing that comes out is regulation, compliance, laws. Are we ever going to get past it and be like security for the sake of being secure and having a successful business? Like security is a big part of your business being successful, because once you go through a breach, it's going to cost you millions and millions of dollars to get over it.
Well, compliance losses are typically large losses to the business, so that's why they focus there. But it doesn't matter if it's a very large incident response or a reputation damage or something. Those dollars are just as green as the compliance dollars you have to lay out for fines and and further audits and FTC orders, consent decrees that you have to sign. Those are real expensive and can put you out of business. But so can reputation damage. You know, it can also put you out of business. It can impact your stock price. It can
and then the stock bounces back. So I hate to be the devil's advocate. But I hate to be the devil's advocate.
So
here.
the stock might bounce back, but what did you have to stop? Were you launching a merger and acquisition that you were expecting to get? Now you have to spend 2 years.
Those are the unknowns.
Those are the unknowns, but those are very green dollars as well. I mean, if you were planning a 30% growth after you completed this acquisition, that 30% dollars of your growth is what you lost. It's not just the stock price that you took temporarily, but now you had to put everything out for 2 years and deal with this problem that you have now. So there's a lot more to it than just a stock price dip. And if you're a non-public thing, if you're not a public company,
you're out of business.
You're
out of business. You're out of business.
So it's not just the stock price.
If you're a small company, you're out of business. Let's just be completely and absolutely clear about it. If you're listening or watching this podcast, if you are a small company and you go through a breach, you are out of business. Because if you serve enterprise clients and you compromise those enterprise clients, you're out of business. Because those enterprise customers are going to go to your next competitor, and they don't. People say one of the challenges, is there's no loyalty. And I go, people expect you to take responsibility for what they're trusting you to have. There can't be loyalty if you're negligent. Because if I trusted you as my service provider to process something and you were negligent in doing so, I don't have any loyalty towards you because you didn't have any loyalty towards me. You didn't respect the data I was giving you. And I've met with so many small businesses who've been through a breach. You go, 50% of our clients left, 60% of our clients left. No one's loyal. And I go, they were loyal. They paid you. You did your job. You just weren't investing and maintaining the trust that was needed to have a successful relationship with your clients. So stop blaming them for leaving because they're going to have to pay for something that they're never going to recoup from you. Their insurance premiums are going to go up. They're going to have to employ and
damage control
and
with
do all the
their
damage.
clients.
Right. I mean, Quest Diagnostics and LabCorp. I mean, we talk about that. That's freshest in the news. They're the ones out there doing all the damage. AMCA, no one's heard of them. None of the patients are calling AMCA and going like, it's your fault that my medical file now with the blood test I took for something that's really private that now could be used in the future to disqualify me from a job or cause me and my family embarrassment. I mean, medical data is very, very private. Diseases, things that people suffer, things that people tell their doctors. It's no difference. I always say there's two files in the hacker world that I've seen in the time I spend on the dark web that are monetized, aren't spoken about, and are readily available and are used all the darn time. That's medical files and legal files. If you're a lawyer and if you're a doctor and you've got a patient's medical file, the second I breach you and I take that file, I already know who that person is because I've already got all that information. And if there's something embarrassing and you do a LinkedIn search on that person and go, oh, he's an executive. I wonder if people want to know that he's had, 4 STDs in the last 2 years and he's technically married. So where's he getting these STDs from? So who's sleeping around, him or his wife? Right? And now I send an email with that medical file and say, hey, I'm going to mail this to your wife if you don't pay me $20,000. That person's going to go take a $20,000 loan and pay it. Because he's not going to go to a cyber company and be like, a hacker's trying to blackmail me. He's not going to the FBI. He's paying that $20,000 and he's never talking about it. And I see that all the time. And it's
the doctors don't realize how valuable their patient data is, and they leave it laying around in folders. And a
medical file on the dark web. If you go to any of the 70 different marketplaces and you want to buy a medical file on someone, it's anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 for the file. A credit card, cents, pennies.
Yep.
Medical file, $5,000. So understand, if I'm selling you a file,
there's also Medicare and Medicaid fraud too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of just I need to have
or
an
insurance
operations
fraud.
Or insurance fraud. I need to have an operation done, and I'll put it on your against your account rather than my own, because I'll get your insurance to pay for it. So who knows?
Well, part of it is insurance fraud, and that's the new kind of healthcare fraud that's happening now. That's also causing for a ton of losses. There's no real model to address that today, meaning there's no way to verify an insurance billing from a doctor or a hospital to an insurance company outside of just the standard documentation. There's no verification. There's no patient involvement outside of the bill that the patient gets, and most people don't open those bills. They don't open the statement that you get from your insurance company of saying what they paid for your doctor and for what. I think only 10 or 15% of people open that letter, is what I've been told by people in the medical industry. So that's mind-boggling.
Well, the whole pricing of it, it's crazy anyway. I mean, they send you a bill for $100,000 and then it goes off to insurance or it goes off to Medicare or whatever it is. It comes back $1,500. Well, what happened here? How did it go from $100,000 to $1,500? And that's what I owe. So, I mean, it's just the retail pricing of things you can't even tell. So there's no transparency in even the pricing model to know how much it is. So you get the statement in, you're like, well, I guess I'm not going to read that. I'll wait for the next one to come in to see what it actually costs and how much is going to cost for me. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it continues to be a challenge. The human factor in security is always a challenge, and I say that, in any aspect, even in our personal lives, human behavior is absolutely insane. I just read a study that was done by Ben Gurion University in Israel, in Beersheba, one of the top cyber research programs. They developed a malware that studies a person's click and mouse habits and can emulate. The malware literally studies a user's click and mouse habits so that when it's operating and getting data, it can actually emulate the user. Now, they were able to develop that tool in the university as part of their research, but that's a scary thought, because if you ever thought of using, I've been a very proponent of user behavior analytics and using more user behavior in security, studying how people behave on a computer to identify anomalies in real time and be able to stop something from taking place in real time and not in a log 3 weeks later. You go, oh, wow, we had 20 gigabytes worth of data downloaded. That's not normal, right? I mean, those things typically were always, playing fireman in security. And for the longest time, my thought process has been, how can we stop being a fireman and how can we stop playing prevention, right? Like what?
So again, if you go back to FAIR,
right?
Are you even patching your stuff before you worry about emulating somebody's user behavior based on their mouse and keyboard patterns? Have you done basic blocking and tackling of making sure your network is designed right, that you're patching your systems, that you've got multi-factor authentication set up? I mean, I think a lot of small businesses, they hear these like weird, scary,
because
bleeding
we
edge
complicate
kind of
it
things.
though. Sometimes we complicate it.
Well, we might go back and complicate it, but if you're looking at what the actual business loss is that
think of IT, right? Almost everyone who's in cyber comes from IT. Let's go IT 15 years ago. I would say almost. I'm not saying everyone. I'm saying most people have an IT background that go into cyber.
Okay.
I'm not saying everyone does. I'm saying most people that I've met, that are in any cyber role, some of them have an IT background. They were, in networking or, data management or IT management.
There's quite a few that come from accounting and audit and
Correct.
from legal as
Absolutely.
well.
Not disagreeing with that. 15 years ago, IT was the most complex thing in the planet. Everyone hated the IT guy. The IT made plugging and unplugging something on your computer seem so complicated. Out there running programs, going into black screens on your device, and doing, God knows what, running different commands and different things, and it made it extremely, extremely complex. Today, think of setting up an email for your small business. You own a domain. You get a bunch of codes, put them in your hosting. Now you've got your own email account set up through either Outlook or Gmail. You don't need an IT guy to do that. Any basic person can follow those directions. It'll take you 5 minutes or it'll take you an hour. Either way, you can get it done, right? So IT has been simplified and really kind of taken down to the level that any person can do it. And I feel like the challenge to do the basics. I'm not talking about networking, 50 workstations and doing all that. I'm talking about a small business.
Multi-factor authentication is not standard in either Gmail or in...
But you're able to activate it.
But you're able to activate it, but you have to get down there into the settings, under page, under privacy, under whatever, and you do have to have either some determination or someone to tell you exactly where to go in order to set it up. Once you set it up, it's not hard to do, but if you've got a cupcake shop, you really have to have somebody to tell you exactly where to go to set those options up, and we don't normally see that.
But I think that's going to I think MFA will end up getting simplified in Microsoft and Google. I mean, I did MFA for us, and for our email accounts, and one of the things I noticed real quick was the implementation of it wasn't very user friendly. It wasn't.
Exactly. And you read all the time, too.
I spend a lot of time
You read all the
this.
time. You're into the news all the time. Can you, let's be empathetic to the people who are not reading all the time. They just want to, like I said, they're not looking at their compliance requirements. Maybe they don't have the technology skill to even just
my argument is that
there.
we should simplify it. We shouldn't make it too complex. I think there's a fear in like IT and all things around technology is there's always that fear of being replaced. I'm going to do a job and then I'm going to run out. So I'm going to, it's like a car mechanic. You bring your car in to get your oil change. They're like, oh, by the way, bring your car in a month. Your brakes should be done by then. And now for a whole month, you're thinking about the fact that but the car mechanic, all he's trying to do is just keep business coming. He doesn't want to send you off. And that's why dealerships today, do a better job of servicing cars, because you come in and you do your full service and you walk away, and they're not calling you, they're not trying to upsell you, they're just taking care of it for you. And I've seen that difference between going to like a car dealer to just a normal mechanic shop. The mechanic is always trying to upsell me, get me to do other things, and at the dealership I take my car and I say, hey, I'm here for my 20,000 mile service, and they'll do it. And they'll be like, oh, by the way, this time we're going to do your brakes. And you're like, okay. They don't complicate it.
I'm more suspicious of my dealer as well. So.
but they don't complicate it. Where I go to the mechanic, you go, see, I'm looking at these, and he's trying to explain it to you, and my bullshit meter goes up. because I'm like, and I see that with security folks who go to meet small, medium-sized businesses, where they're complicating it. They go, oh, and you scare the person and go, well, one, this sounds like it's going to be really, really expensive. Number two, I can't afford it. Number three, this sounds really complicated. How's it going to change the way I do business? And I'm afraid of change.
Well, I think that's why a virtual CISO role is attractive to those smaller businesses,
Right.
is because, if you're on a retainer model and you're on a use it or lose it, for 2 hours, and I'm a small businessman too, so I know I need to be conservative with my spend, I wouldn't want to, like the vampire, you don't want to suck all the blood out because then you don't have anything to eat tomorrow. You want to make sure that you're having respect for your clients and that you are working with them as a partner so that they can grow, grow at a rate that's appropriate to them and that they're comfortable with. But like you said, we're putting the resources where they need to go to most in their highest risk and highest cost items first, and then you mature over time. You're not going to at least treat it as a project, where one and done, and like you said with the car dealership, we don't see you again. We're constantly trying to upsell. If you're on that retainer model and you've got a relationship built with them, that you're going to be able to grow your program over time.
So when we look at the state of cybersecurity, we've kind of been speaking about the small business aspect of it, but technology-wise, what are you excited about? What do you feel like is missing to help really, build a better state of cybersecurity?
I'm excited about some of the automation, like the AI, machine learning and automation to do some of the more, lower hanging fruit type of tasks. Right. I think blockchain for authentication is going to be a big improvement. Authentication management has always been a challenge. You've got multiple users trying to access multiple applications, and then multiple application owners who might not necessarily know who all the users are, and then a set of managers somewhere in the middle there. That trying to get some type of automation around that, I think is going to be very helpful. And blockchain, I think, is a good technology, for that I'm looking forward to.
What's missing? Anything?
I think is more emphasis on the business risk. I think for the security teams and the CISOs, stop talking about controls and worst case research level type of stuff, and talk about what's most relevant to the business if you want to really be impactful at your company. And privacy we talked about as well. I think that those are coming together. We're going to start seeing more privacy emphasis, I think, coming in the next several years. I think we're also going to see more virtual CISOs because, like you were talking about before, they're kind of the scapegoat for the whole company. Either they're damned if they do or they're damned if they don't. Either you've met your compliance requirements and your job's not important anymore, or you failed at your job because we didn't listen to you and we've had a breach and you're still out. There tends to be a pile on where they want somebody to blame. The business wants somebody to blame for their own decision making, and that inevitably ends up being the CISO. If you have a virtual CISO or an external person, the business can't blame the external person. Those are the board of directors and the CEOs responsible for the decisions that they make.
Right.
And there's not going to be anyone else to be held accountable. And I think we're also going to start seeing boards of directors being more educated in cybersecurity and data privacy. I do several volunteer boards, and trying to get more, security leadership on boards of directors. And there's still not a lot of cyber talent on boards of directors. In some of the regulated industries, we're seeing that. But for most of the general, companies out there, there's a legal guy, there's a finance guy, maybe there's an operations guy, but there's generally not cyber talent. They have to go external to find somebody to explain what risks are. The NACD has published, guidelines for cybersecurity, and they've got a certification for board members to say, here's what you should be asking, here's the questions you should be asking, but there's not anyone really on the board to explain it to them once they get the answers back. So I think we're going to start seeing some more of that.
What are some of your best practices in security? What are some of the things you do that you consider to be your best practices?
It depends on your business. So for me, I am going to be dealing with a lot of confidential information, a lot of very sensitive information. So one of the first things I did was I got an email filtering and encryption service on my mail. And like I said, I've set up multi-factor authentication everywhere I can get it. I've got a VPN on all of my devices, so everything from my mobile phone to my laptop to my computer at home. I've got separate computers for my personal and for my work, and I don't mix them. I'm using a document management service so that there's encrypted, both at rest and in transit. So there's not any documents going through email. It's all maintained within that document management service. But that's my business. If I had a large online presence, it would be a completely different model. I would focus more on the website security, on the transactions between my sponsors, like we were talking about before, my banking transactions and payments in and out, to make sure that those processes are secure. So it depends on each company and how they generate revenue.
Finally, FAIR next week has its first Atlanta chapter meeting.
Yes, 1 week from today, the inaugural FAIR chapter meeting for Atlanta.
That's June 13th.
June 13th at 6 p.m. at Atlanta Tech Park in Norcross, 107 Technology Parkway. And Jack Jones, who's one of the co-authors of the Measuring and Managing Information Risk, and he is, the member of the board of directors for both the FAIR Institute and for RiskLens. He is going to be coming in to inaugurate the chapter.
Excellent.
So if you've bought the book already, come bring your book and Jack will sign it, but he's going to show us some practical knowledge, practical tips for applying FAIR.
I'm very upset I'm going to miss that.
Break my heart, James.
I'm sorry. I have to be I'm out of the state that day, otherwise I'd be there. I'd cancel any other engagement
tell everyone you go and send a proxy, because the other thing about this Atlanta FAIR chapter, and I don't know if you follow sports at all, but we've had the Red Sox, we've had the Bruins now in the Stanley Cup Finals, and of course we have the Patriots from Boston. Boston also holds the records for the most members at their inaugural chapter meeting at 46. And I've got the challenge out to the Atlanta community
28-3.
We've got to beat Boston at something important. So please come on out to our inaugural chapter meeting.
So where can they go to register?
So register online at fairinstitute.org. I'm also working on having registration at the door. I think they generally want to vet the people who come through to make sure that there's not going to be solicitation of the FAIR members, at the chapter meeting. So they do want you to go through a short screening process from the FAIR Institute, and then you'll be able to register for the meeting. But the meeting is free. It is open to everyone, and if you have any problems, I'd encourage them to reach out to me or the FAIR Institute to get us out to the meeting.
And then FAIR has their big kind of annual convention in September.
Yes, FairCon is what it's called. FairCon 2019 is going to be in National Harbor, Maryland at the Gaylord Resorts. It's September 22nd and 23rd are classes. So they've got a beginner's track, an advanced track, and then the actual conference is the 24th and 25th. And that is all going to be about implementing FAIR in your organization and how to get a program started.
And is there a certification for FAIR? Meaning, do you have
There
to?
are a couple. There's an Open FAIR certification that is put through by the Open Group. There's classes. I actually have a discount code that to apply for one of the online classes. There's the classroom training version that's going to be at FairCon, and or there's self-study is actually how I got certified through FAIR. So the Open Group has the body of knowledge on their website. You can download that and you pay for your voucher, and then you can go take the certification exam.
Very cool. Well, First of all, thank you for being here today.
Thank you,
I
James.
really appreciate it. So, like Donna just said, the Fair Institute chapter meeting in Atlanta is June 13, 2019 in Atlanta Tech Park. That's it for our episode today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll be back with more next week.